Today, we are covering the emotional drivers behind dementia and Alzheimer's. Now, I found this particular episode especially fascinating. More and more people seem to be impacted by the devastating effects of dementia. And based on the data obtained from the 2019 Global Burden of Disease database, from 1990 to 2019, the incidence and prevalence of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias increased by almost 200%. So that is a 200% increase in 20 years. That looks pretty bleak as far as future predictions. Now, the drivers behind dementia and Alzheimer's significantly overlap. For the most part, dementia is an overarching term that refers to a range of symptoms affecting cognitive abilities, while Alzheimer's disease is a specific type of dementia, and that's characterized by progressive memory loss and cognitive decline. And though there are variations of dementia, Alzheimer's is by far the most common. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, download, and comment. It really helps us to continue to create all this great content for you and others, and it lets us know if we're meeting the needs of our community. In researching the origins of Alzheimer's disease, I found that the condition was named after Alois Alzheimer, who was a student of psychiatry as well as neuropathology. In 1901, Alzheimer was introduced to a patient named Auguste Deter, a female patient aged 51 years who was a student of Alzheimer's grandfather. She had shown several abnormal behaviors, such as short-term amnesia type things, disorientation, and various other types of hysteria. Auguste died 4 years after being admitted to the hospital at the age of 54. By the time of her death, she had deteriorated to the point of losing all cognitive ability. Now, this was very rare for the time, and so they took great interest in her. And Dr. Alzheimer, after her death, conducted a biopsy of her brain to investigate the correlation between the medical records. He had been with her for that whole 4 years. And so the medical records and her symptoms. And he found that the cerebral cortex was generally thinned. And the region that controlled memory, language, judgment, and thinking was severely impaired. Senile plaques were formed in the neurons and the tangles in her brain. And at the time, the consensus among medical doctors was that senile plaque could only be found in people who were 70 years old and up. And this whole thing about neurofibrillary tangles, what they found in her brain was a completely new observation. So considering her age, both of these findings were exceptional. And she became the first patient that was officially diagnosed with what was now called Alzheimer's disease. In reading further on this case, I found something very interesting. In his case notes, Alzheimer recounted a detail about his work with Auguste. Over time, she completely dissociated from herself. And within that dissociation from self, she would only answer to her husband's name. And in increasingly rare moments of clarity, when Alzheimer would ask her questions about her condition, she would always answer with the very same phrase. So these were her moments of clarity. She would say, so to speak, I lost myself. Now, I find this so interesting Because one of the most basic drivers behind dementia and Alzheimer's is the desire to forget or to dissociate from the reality of one's life. Something else that just blew my mind was that a large number of scientists and researchers are calling Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes because of the role that blood sugar and insulin play in Alzheimer's. When I read this, it all clicked for me. If you haven't listened yet, I would recommend checking out my recent episode on diabetes to learn more. But from a mind change perspective, it all makes sense. See, our bodies are constantly trying to speak and communicate. When we can't or won't listen, usually due to a language barrier between the conscious and the subconscious mind, the body speaks louder or in a different way to help get us to listen. So basically, if the emotional drivers behind diabetes are not listened to, they can eventually escalate into another condition, Alzheimer's. Remember that the body is very metaphoric. The main driver behind diabetes is unresolved trauma that has stolen the joy or sweetness out of our life. Now, this can come from many things, and in many type 1 diabetes, what we see is it's often ancestral, these things that have happened. And in type 2, it's often found in attachment wounds in our childhood, especially attachment wounds with the mother. Now, not everyone with Alzheimer's or dementia will have been diagnosed with diabetes. Remember, the diagnosis only comes because of symptoms that are exhibited. In Alzheimer's, we see that someone who views their past through a very bitter or negative lens, they so much so that they may have forgotten or even repressed much of their past as a way to try to deal with it. They may have been living with a form of selective dementia, and this selective dementia is like forgetting or even altering one's reality through a large part of their life. And remember, they're not doing this to live in some sort of denial. It's really a dissociation from things that were difficult or that they felt like they couldn't get past in their lives. The actual dementia so the diagnosis of dementia is recognized as plaques in the brain. And that's just a physical result of the years of trying to forget or cover over or block out things that happened to them or things that they did earlier in life that they may feel badly about or feel guilty or shame about. And what this is just a severe coping strategy. So let's dive a little deeper into the drivers. First, I'll cover generalized dementia, and then we'll look at some of the specifics for Alzheimer's. So for dementia, these people view the world and their experience in it as oppressive or controlling. They may have grown up in an environment that felt hostile, uncaring, or demoralizing. They may have felt as though they didn't have the support that they needed in childhood, and so that they were kind of on their own to fight their own battles. It's very common that they didn't feel recognized or validated as a child, often by the mother. And these people would have needed more nurturing, more sweetness, but were ashamed to ask for it or ashamed even to need it. And this may have come because you were told, or these people got the perception that life was hard. Life has always been hard. Life will always be hard. You just need to deal with it. Life is tough and you need to just man up or get tougher, right? Their belief and experience in childhood that life is so hard then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because they believed life would be hard and harsh, it was. Now they're angry and bitter about the way that things turned out, and they're just tired of fighting. Because of this negative outlook that was adopted at a young age, these people may disconnect from the people that were closest to them. So you may have kept people at an arm's length or treated them poorly. And this only causes, of course, more pain and hardship. So when you've done that, maybe, this whole thought process, maybe you're a parent and so you deal with your children in kind of this harsh, kind of authoritarian way, and you deal with your kids in this way, and you're just asking them to toughen up and be stronger. Maybe you're belittling them and you're treating them in this way. And as you become an adult, or as they become adults, you start to realize the effect that it had on them. And so this is one of those things that it's like you can't undo this. So you start to choose to deny reality instead, to alter reality, to dissociate from the pain that you caused your children or your loved ones in your life. And in effect, you're lying to yourself and to others around you about how things really were. Now, you're not trying to invalidate or to deny their reality on the outside. It's really more you're trying to deny that and do it to yourself so that you don't take on the amount of pain, the amount of shame, the amount of guilt, the amount of regret that would come with admitting to these things or realizing these things. So eventually, with enough of that, you convince yourself that their experiences, your loved one or the people around you, that their experiences aren't true and it never happened. And that just continues that legacy of invalidation and demoralization. Now, specific to Alzheimer's, there's a few more kind of added layers to this. This is really wanting to escape this cycle of blame, guilt, or responsibility. You may have grown up in a home where there was narcissism, abuse, or severe oppression. One or both of your parents may have been difficult to connect with, and you did not feel like you had the nurturing that you needed. As a child, your needs, your wants, your desires were not heard or made important. You may have been held responsible for all sorts of wrongs and felt a great need to prove your innocence or prove your value. As you grew, you developed a similar strategy of denial, blame, avoiding, and responsibility deflecting. Any moments of clarity or connection would bring so much guilt rather than joy, which would then cycle you back into a self-denial as a way to deal with the pain of this continued cycle. These people can become increasingly difficult to be in a relationship with. Now, this both serves them and then causes more need for coping. So on the one hand, they desperately want to connect, to fill the hole that they have still from childhood. But on the other hand, their closest relationships are the ones that reflect most to them, reflect back on them. Therefore, they bring the most pain. And so these people think that peace can only come from being alone. Now, it's possible that they tried to fight all of the disconnection that they felt in childhood by overcompensating and feeling responsible for making sure that everyone else was always taken care of. So in the carrying of other people's pains and burdens in an effort to make up for what they didn't get as a child, well, over time, they build up resentment because this only further separates them from their own needs. Eventually, the body just decides to begin shutting down so that they can finally be taken care of. There's a deep feeling of injustice and like the world is against you. This creates a victim mentality and supports the need to blame others and deflect responsibility. So for these people, as they age, they inadvertently hold on to the hardships of life rather than the joy. So much so that the good becomes hard to remember, causing things to calcify in particular regions of the brain. It becomes harder to connect with others and validate their experiences, which then distances you even further from your environment, from the people you love. And so the way to escape this is to go deeper inward. Now, according to the CDC, the number of Alzheimer's disease cases is predicted to rise to an estimated 14 million people by 2060, with women and minority populations being affected the most. Why would there be more of a correlation between women and minorities? There's also a correlation between lower levels of education, higher rates of poverty, and greater exposure to adversity and discrimination. And those are the things that increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease, which makes a lot of sense when we look at the drivers. The good news is reversal is possible. Similar to diabetes, not many people know about this or even believe that it's possible, but hope is out there. Dale E. Bredesen, MD, is an internationally recognized expert in the mechanisms of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. He was interviewed recently and asked, up to this point, cognitive decline, once identified, has been largely considered irreversible and unstoppable. Do you consider this the case and now, and why? So Dr. Bredesen, this is how he responds. He says, I do not consider this the case now. There has been tremendous progress in the last several years, and this is very exciting times for studies of neurodegenerative illnesses. Although the dogma has been that there is nothing that prevents, slows, or reverses the course of cognitive decline in diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, there are clearly multiple studies now in both anecdotal and controlled trials that show examples in which there is indeed prevention and reversal or decline. Our early childhood experiences and subsequent belief systems have an undeniable impact on our current health and well-being. The main reason we are seeing an increase in cognitive impairments like Alzheimer's is that the primary drivers are ignored. The way out of this condition, as with most instances of disease in the body, is by going inside the mind and the subconscious programming that helps us develop these conditions in the first place. What we're going to go after is those initial received or perceived messages from parents or caregivers that communicated a lack of nurturing and support. When we rewrite and rewire those messages, we can input something different there. In the end, our goal is to put the power back where it belongs, back in you. This means that you will be the biggest support for you. I look forward to seeing you every other week as we dive into this fascinating topic. Please make sure to leave those 5-star reviews and comment on a disease, symptom, or ailment you would like to hear covered on the podcast. As a reminder, you can sign up for the podcast newsletter and receive 10% off private one-to-one sessions with one of our qualified practitioners. And you can find more information about that on our website. Until next time, thanks for joining us on the Mind Change podcast, where we are changing the world, one mind at a time.